So again, it'll be something the herbs, the energetics of herbs will revisit over time. And the reason I'm really spending the time is it is just you learning how to speak the language of your body. It's also helping you realize that in the West, where we will just get a recipe and we'll have dozens of different herbs or a few different herbs and just whatever tastes good, it isn't necessarily what's going to balance our body, make us healthy. It can actually lead to some problems if we have too much of one seasoning or not enough of another. And so it's just giving you this toolkit to understand that food is medicine. All food has an effect on your body. And hundreds and hundreds, thousands of different foods have been categorized energetically according to Chinese medicine. And you have the information to make sure that that science works for you. So let's go ahead and I'll share the screen. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the second lesson on the energetics of herbs and this idea of the power of food as medicine. Today, we're going to first begin by noting that all food has temperatures. These temperatures are a measure not of like, is it hot or cold as you touch it, but rather the effect on the metabolism after initial digestion. So after you take it in, consume it with your food or in a tea or a broth or a smoothie, what happens within the body? So, for example, people with cold constitutions or temporary cold constitution, we'll talk about some of that later, would need to have more warming herbs, and vice versa. If you have a hot constitution or you're temporarily hot, then you would want to have more cooling energetics. Herbs may also be chosen according to the seasons or prevailing weather, and we'll also look at that again as we get into some of the flavors of the herbs. There are the 5 temperatures: hot, warm, neutral, cool, and cold. Neutral means that they're pretty okay for everybody in any situation. They might not have a healing effect if you are struggling with a health problem that is on the hot or cold side, but it means that it won't throw your body out of whack, and the dominant part of your diet should be made up of these neutral herbs. Very important to Chinese medicine are the 5 flavors of herbs. These flavors should ideally come in balance, but each herb is classified as having one of these 5 flavors, and I'm going to go through each one of them on their own. And these flavors affect particular organ systems, and they make sure that when you have the 5 within your diet on a regular basis, you're going to be suiting all of the energetic needs that you have. So the first flavor is sweet. The sweet flavor arises from the earth element, and it benefits the spleen system. So the spleen, stomach, pancreas. Sweet herbs strengthen, moisten, and help tonify deficiency. So that's the primary effect of sweet. So when we look at the spreadsheet later and we talk about how different herbs have different benefits, this is one of the interactions of the sweet flavor. The season of the sweet flavor is late summer, so it's in alignment with the spleen and that season of late summer. The next flavor is pungent. Pungent flavor arises from the metal element and is tied to the lung system, so the lung and large intestine. The effect of pungent herbs is that they disperse stagnation and promote flow. So if you ever feel like you have stagnant energy, you've got stagnation within your body, pungent herbs are a wonderful way to help release that. The season of the pungent flavor linked to the lung is the autumn season. Salty flavor arises from the water element and the kidney. Salty flavor, salty herbs moisten, soften, and detoxify. And there are not a lot of salty herbs. Nettle, as pictured here, is one of them. And when you see the spreadsheet, that you'll see others. So you can get it from actual salt, which is fine, as well as from microalgae. So that's another benefit there. The season of the salty flavor is winter. Sour, and these are rose hips pictured here. The sour flavor arises from the wood element, and benefits the liver. And that's the season that we're in now. And it's interesting, in the season that you need to have sourness, you don't want to overdo it. It's this very delicate balance where you want to have just enough sour, but you don't want to go to overkill. So just making that you're mindful of adding that. Sour herbs, their benefit is they stimulate absorption of nutrients and contraction. So we have a lot of functions in our body where we need contraction within the smooth muscles, the large intestine, small intestine, for example. And when we have contraction, we're able to move food through our bodies efficiently. This helps us break down fat as well. The season of the sour flavor is spring. And lastly, we have bitter. The bitter flavor arises from the fire element and benefits the heart, of course. Bitter herbs drain and counteract dampness. Summer is a season associated with bitter, and it is also the season where we have a lot of phlegm damp accumulation. And so it's beneficial to have bitter foods, as thyme pictured here, for example. We are going to continue in the second lesson looking at specific conditions in the body where we can come out of balance, and we use the herbs to bring the body back into balance. We're also going to be looking at some other functions and benefits of the herbs as well. So today we're going to be focusing on draining dampness, expelling wind, and we've already talked about the flavors of the herbs. So let's begin by looking at dampness. This is probably one of the most common conditions in the West, and it happens because of our poor diet and lifestyle choices predominantly. Sometimes it is due to where you live, if you live in a very damp, humid environment. However, most often it is diet and lifestyle. So what it means is that dampness refers to an accumulation of abnormal fluid levels or moisture in the body. When you have too much fluid in places, qi and blood cannot flow within the organs and tissues, inhibiting their function. It is associated with the spleen organ system predominantly because the spleen is responsible for transforming and transporting fluids in the body. So when you have a poor diet, the spleen is part of the digestive system, you're really setting yourself up for this phlegm, some of these damp conditions. Dampness can be caused by internal and external factors, so diet and lifestyle, climate, and emotional stress. So there's a lot of different factors that can contribute, which is why we always try and calm our mind when we do Qigong. Well, we do Qigong, we do mudras, we do a lot of things to make sure that we are able to clear damp from the body. Common causes of dampness include damp-producing foods, so greasy, fatty, fried foods are very common causes. Living and working in damp environments, a weak spleen, again, due to your emotions and your dietary choices. So what are some symptoms that let you see dampness in general? We're going to talk about some specific types of dampness in a moment, but let's look at dampness symptoms in general. So you often have a heaviness and a sensation of fullness in the body. So your limbs feel heavy. They feel puffy is the word I always use. So if I eat wheat or pizza, like there you go, cheese and processed food, both bad. I'll get, like, I call it puffiness. My joints get puffy, my hands get puffy, my sinuses get inflated. So that's one of them. Fatigue and lethargy, which obstructs the vital flow of qi or energy. That's another symptom that comes. Oftentimes you might get that afternoon crash. That is another sign. Swelling or edema, which is different from puffiness in that you can push and see the fluid and liquids. I have some photos later, particularly in the extremities. Digestive disturbances, so loose stools, bloating, diarrhea, that kind of thing is a sign of dampness. Phlegm accumulation, there is a specific phlegm damp that we'll talk about, but you could have copious amounts of sputum that you cough up. Sensation, this feeling of, you've got like gunk in the throat. That's very common in dampness. Joint pain and stiffness, because where there's to excess fluid. We can't get qi to nourish the joints. So that it often can be worse in damp or humid weather. And then skin conditions, oftentimes like eczema, acne, fungal infections that a lot of people will get, it can disrupt the normal functioning of the skin. So even though it's related to the spleen and not the skin, the lung is more related to the skin, when you don't have a proper flow, you can't get nutrients to the skin. So pathogens can accumulate and not clear. We're going to now look at damp heat. I have 2 slides on damp heat. There's 12 specific signs of this damp heat condition. So you'll see some of the general signs, but then you're going to have a little bit more specific information. So feeling of heaviness and stickiness through the body. So things just feel like you're sticky. You might even have redness, inflammation, swelling, accompanied by a feeling of heat. You actually feel hot. Skin eruptions like acne, boils, or rashes that are red, itchy, and ooze. Those are a damp heat sign. Excessive sweating, especially in localized areas during sleep. So maybe just your head sweats, or maybe your chest sweats, or your legs sweat. And that's, again, during sleep. That'll let you know you've got some damp accumulation, damp heat. A strong and foul smell body odor. I really want to do some lessons or some videos on what does your smell tell you? And this is one of the things your smells tells you. If you have a very sour, foul smelling body odor, it's not just a problem with your underarms. There's something deep within you causing that odor. It's a sign. It's your body communicating with you. And then digestive disturbances, very much more specifically of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, or constipation. It's just some kind of disruption. But most often you're going to have a loose stool with a sticky, foul smell. Sometimes if the feces, the stool's hard to release, that's a sign of damp heat. Other symptoms of damp heat, burning and painful sensation during urination with a dark, scanty, or maybe even a cloudy urine, yellowish discharge from the eyes, ears, or genitals, irritability, restlessness, and mood swings, thirst with a preference for cold drinks. You really just, oh, I gotta drink a cold drink. That's just gonna make it worse, but it's a craving that you have. Joint pain and stiffness, again, here's that general symptom that we see here with damp, humid weather, and even headaches or dizziness, especially if your damp heat is stuck up in your head. So let's look at how we transform or drain this damp heat. I've had some that I've been grappling with myself, so I've been drinking burdock root tea. This is a picture of burdock root here. And as everything in Chinese medicine, you'll just do it for a cycle of, try it for a week, monitor if you feel that the symptoms have eased, and then you can go back to just your neutral balanced foods, your 5 flavors, and check that. Celery seed is great to add to recipes. Dandelion root is wonderful to also cook with, as well as use within a tea. You can have a dandelion root tea. I made corn silk tea today. You can buy, there's some beautiful Korean brands online, but you can also, when you buy corn, you'll just take 3 ears of corn in a large pot of water, peel off the green husk, but keep the silk on the corn. Boil the water, and we've done this before, so I'll share that video this week. Boil the water, and then you'll drink that as the tea, that corn silk tea. So that's really lovely. Golden seal and sandalwood root, those are things that they sell at a health food store. The one caution when you use concentrated, like herbal remedy at a health food store, is that they're super concentrated and not necessarily, you don't need something that strong. It's always best to get to the food if you're able. So tea is made with a food. So if you can find golden seal tea or sandalwood root tea, those things are going to be better for you to regulate and monitor. And if you have really severe damp heat, then you can also go to your Chinese medicine practitioner, and they can prescribe actual herbal remedies that they'll monitor for you as you move through it. But if it's just a short-term thing, you're like, oh, let me try this, then any of these are wonderful. And most of these are great, are tea remedies. for this damp heat, draining and transforming. Damp cold. So again, you're going to see some of those general damp conditions, but there's going to be variation as well. We have the same feeling of heaviness and lethargy, as if the body is weighted down, almost like a water balloon. You know how water balloons just sag? That's kind of that feeling that you have internally. You will have those sensations of coldness and chilliness, especially on the lower back and the limbs. Stiff, achy muscles, which may worsen in damp weather. Edema or swelling, especially in the extremities. Digestive disturbances, again, like we had before, bloating, abdominal discomfort, loose stools. But a reduced appetite is a specific symptom to this damp cold, with a preference for warm foods and drinks. We always want to have warm foods and drinks anyway, but you just the thought of anything cold is really anathema to you. Continuing symptoms, you have clear, copious, and watery discharge from the nose or the vagina. So that's also this more watery substance. Exacerbation of symptoms in damp or humid environments. Increased susceptibility to respiratory infections such as cold and flu. So you're more vulnerable, you find you get them more often. A pale complexion that's really cool to touch when you touch the skin. Urinary symptoms such as frequent urination with clear, dilute urine, like too much coming out. There's other things that can cause it, but this compilation of symptoms together is what can help you see, ooh, do I have damp cold? And if you think you have it severely, of course, see a TCM practitioner. But then you also have a feeling of mental fog or confusion. You're just not with it. That's a very prominent symptom of many of the damp conditions, but especially this damp cold. What I love about going over the symptoms here in the West, it's like you have a symptom and it means nothing to you. It's just like, oh, here's a symptom, here's a medicine. And in Chinese medicine, here's a symptom and oh boy, this is what it means. And this is how you get at the root of the problem instead of just eradicating the symptom and causing further problems. So Western medicine is designed, for example, let's say here, to get rid of the edema and swelling, but oftentimes it disrupts the spleen, it disrupts the small intestine and the liver, which leads to more damp cold. So you have to have more medication. You don't ever get to the root of the problem. And the way the herbs work is they get to the root of the problem and help deal with it at that level. So there are a lot of herbs that you can add to your cooking that are beneficial for the damp cold to drain and transform it, as well as tea remedies that you can do. So angelica root is wonderful for a tea remedy. Black pepper, cardamom, cinnamon bark, garlic, ginger, horseradish are all amazing food herbal remedies that you can integrate within different recipes. You can make teas out of all of these, and a lot of these foods are in teas. And again, you'll know you're overdoing it with the warming if you start having constipation or a red tip on your tongue or red eyes or symptoms of the damp heat. So again, it's always looking and questioning and wondering, where am I at? How do I feel? What do I notice? And that helps you really identify what herbs are beneficial. So let's go on to phlegm. So again, we have the feeling of heaviness and lethargy, but instead of being like a water balloon, that kind of like heavy bounciness, this is just like, imagine like this phlegm, like this weighted goop just within you, bringing you down. So it's a different sensation, if you will. You'll have excessive phlegm production. Often leading to coughing with a sticky sputum that is very difficult to expectorate, very difficult to get out. And then you'll have congestion or stuffiness in the chest, sinuses, and throat. That lets you know that your phlegm is stuck in your lungs, right? When we have phlegm in our lungs, our sinuses get stuffy. So it's all linked, it's all connected. You'll have this wheezing or shortness of breath sometimes. However, you can have phlegm in your lungs without wheeziness or shortness of breath. So it's kind of if you have that wheeziness and shortness of breath, you have a lot of phlegm, and you definitely might want to see a practitioner to kind of jumpstart that clearing. Feeling or fullness or bloating in the abdomen, like there's something stuck there. That's what she's showing. Nausea, belching, and acid reflux. You'll notice each of these damp conditions has their own unique digestive disturbance, and that's what happens for phlegm. You also have that dull, foggy-headed feeling with more, you just can't think clearly. So not just so much as memory, kind of overall, but I just can't get a thought wrapped around, I can't wrap my head around something. Swelling and edema again in the extremities, exacerbation in damp, humid weather, fatigue and lethargy, because that phlegm dampness, that's what this woman depicts here, obstructs your chi. Whenever you have lethargy, your chi is not flowing. Something is blocking it. Joint pain and stiffness, especially if the dampness is in the joints. And here are skin conditions again, where you've got the fungal infections, just the overall functioning of the skin is not, you don't have the chi and blood flowing to the skin to help it be healthy. All right, water is our last phlegm damp, our last dampness condition. So we have this heavy sensation, fullness in the body, especially in the limbs and the abdomen. So not just in the extremities, we're hitting that fullness down in the abdomen. Swelling or edema, particularly in the lower extremities, the ankles and feet, which is what's pictured here. Unlike the copious urination, we have difficulty in urination with reduced urine output or a feeling of incomplete emptying of the bladder, right? We hear oftentimes about all these urinary complaints, and most of the conditions come from some type of phlegm, some type of damp problem. You'll have digestive disturbances such as bloating, abdominal distension, poor appetite, loose stools or diarrhea. And then again, you'll have that fatigue and lethargy because you are blocking. All of these damp conditions will have that fatigue and lethargy. You'll also have aching or heaviness. So as opposed to the joint pain, it's just like, oh, everything aches. Oh, it's just this general achiness. You will have thick, can have thick, greasy, or cloudy vaginal discharge with a foul odor. And again, we do have so many cosmetic corrections that we have in the West, but your smell, your discharge is telling you very important information about your diet and your lifestyle. You might even have excessive vaginal discharge that can be clear and watery. This feeling of mental fog and confusion, I love this image. It's from Real Simple. I want to give credit to them. It's just really, it's even a little bit more than the phlegm condition. It's just quite difficult to think. And then the same skin conditions, because we're having we're disrupting the normal functioning of the skin. So let's look at the herbs here. Dandelion, horsetail, kava, parsley seeds, which is what I have pictured, and sassafras, root beer, right? Who knew? And that's like one of the main flavors. And so these are, I recommend most of these for teas, but you can do them in the cooking if you want to try that as well. Dandelion leaf and root are great. You can have roasted dandelion or the regular dandelion are fine here. All right, wind is like such a crazy concept. We've talked about it many times in the past, but wind is a metaphor for things that have a rapid, forceful, strong reaction within the body. So it is mostly considered one of the external pathogenic factors that causes various health conditions within the body when your defensive chi, your wei chi that normally protects you, is compromised. It is also described metaphorically. So it's this external force that can invade the body and then can become internal wind. So we have external wind, and if we don't clear that wind, it can come in and cause problems. And we'll look at the symptoms with those problems. Wind conditions are really characterized by they manifest quickly. So you'll see in a moment what I'm talking about. You'll be able to identify with it. They change rapidly and they affect multiple parts of the body. So whereas might have a shoulder pain that you always have, it's from an injury, you've always got that condition, that would not be a wind condition. But if you've got joint pain in your right shoulder, then your left knee, then your right knee, and it's always bouncing around, that would be related to a internal wind condition. So let's look at some specific, some general symptoms, and then we'll look at specifics. Wind heat. Wind heat describes the rapid early onset of illnesses such as the common cold, influenza, laryngitis, with the influence of heat predominating. And you'll see what that means when we look at the symptoms for wind heat. So when you have a wind heat condition, you have a fever, a sore throat, headache, red eyes, you're thirsty, you'll have a rapid pulse, you might have skin eruptions, yellow nasal discharge, restlessness and irritability, and sweating. So that you'll have wind, it comes quickly, you'll have your fever comes quickly. You can think about when you've gotten sick and you've had this combination of symptoms before. And then when you see the wind cold, you'll be like, oh, I've also had that combination of symptoms before. But when you have these wind heat symptoms, this is where we have the herbs to remedy that. So the black cohosh is really, again, very controversial because it's been prescribed a lot for people for hot flashes, but it can lead to hair loss. And that's, again, from very concentrated versions and over a long period of time. So you can use that with discretion. But the others, catnip, elderflower, eucalyptus again, feverfew, and the most common and easiest herbs to use are spearmint, peppermint, and yarrow. They're great for cooking and they're great for teas. And that's really wonderful herbally to clear wind heat. As you know, I also am a huge advocate of cabbage and radish broth. That's the best, most wonderful way to clear wind heat, but that's a food-based remedy. And this is when you also want to supplement your cabbage radish broth. You're sick of it. You don't want to make it anymore. You're like, I need a break. You'll do your peppermint, spearmint, and yarrow. Yeah, and catnip, believe it or not, is great. Elderflower, you'll often find it in a tonic. And the others are most often teas or for cooking. All right, wind cold, same onset, right? You have this rapid onset, cold, flu, laryngitis, but you have cold predominating. So what does that look like symptomatically? Here, you'll have chills, an aversion to wind, headache, stiffness, a runny nose, not the yellow nose, sneezing, a pale complexion, lack of sweating, low energy, and clear urine. Right? Urine should always have a nice straw-like color. And when you have this cold symptom, you'll have this. So the herbs to offset this are basil, cinnamon stick, cilantro, fresh ginger, and sage, and not coriander. You actually want the cilantro leaf. It is really good to expel the wind cold. Dr. Ho always says when we get sick, you need to take the greens of the scallions when you have this cold symptoms. Take the greens of the scallion, take fresh ginger, about 2 inches, boil it for, and again, I don't have the scallions on there because they're not an herb, they're a food. And you boil that for 20 minutes and you drink that when you have the wind cold. And can you guys think of when you've had illnesses and you've had these 2 different types of onset? Very rarely you won't have, you might have a fever with chills, but usually you'll have your chills before your fever. And then the fever kicks in. So, and some people will get chills and never get a fever. So now, wind damp cold is a pathological condition caused by external wind pathogens carrying both dampness and cold. So it's very complex disharmony that affects the body's health. They're characterized by symptoms related to wind, dampness, and cold. So you've got a lot going on there. It often, again, we have that wind pattern. Onset, very rapid onset, and it'll change quickly. The symptoms will change quickly. And that's like with when you have the wind heat and wind cold, you could go from one to the other pretty rapidly as the body's trying to figure out, how do I fight what's coming my way? So for this one, if it persists, I definitely recommend seeing a practitioner. Sterling, if he gets a wind damp cold condition or any of these, we go to Dr. Ho immediately, get a treatment, and he's better within a day. But so here you'll have a combination of different symptoms. You'll have the same as the wind cold symptoms, more than you have with the heat. not urine, urine, oh my gosh. So you're going to really have more of the symptoms related to the cold, and then you'll have some of the achiness that is related to the damp. What makes this different from the wind cold is that you'll have to be treating, your practitioner is going to be looking at some of the damp symptoms, the achiness, the lethargy, the feeling weighted, the swelling in the extremities. And so what really helps here are some pretty hot herbal energy. Camphor, cayenne, chili, the cinnamon stick, horseradish, and rosemary. These are very hot herbs. And again, minuscule amounts should be enough to clear it. Heat, too much heat can worsen a damp condition, but when you're dealing with a wind, damp, cold condition, you want to make sure you can kick it out. So you'll have all of those wind, cold symptoms plus your damp symptoms, and I'll add those so it's a little bit more clear. I thought it was clear when I was making it, but as I was teaching, I'm like, that's not so clear, but I'll make it more clear what those symptoms are. So you get the cold symptoms with phlegm, not with phlegm, with the damp symptoms, and they're a rapid onset. So it's not like you've had damp symptoms, they're like a rapid onset of the damp symptoms. So you're suddenly aching in all of your joints. You're suddenly so tired you can't even lift your head. Think about that. You know that when you get sick sometimes you can see some of these damp symptoms as well. Wind is really when you get sick. The key though is what happens in the West is people will often take a remedy that doesn't really help address the symptom at the root, and they drive the wind deeper. That's where people get internal wind conditions, which we're not going to address today. It's way too complicated. But when you have internal wind, that's when an illness was on the surface, it just came and you're like, okay, let's get rid of it. And a few days and then you're better, maybe a week. But you take all sorts of medications that drive it deep, 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 deep down. And especially when you have that wind, cold, damp, wind, damp, cold, that's when you get these long-term chronic illnesses. And I think that's what happened with a lot of people that have long-term problems from when they've got a flu or something like that. They mask the symptoms and they drove the condition deeper. So it's really hard to get rid of it.